Here we are again. We're in chapter 2 this time. We did a little bit in chapter 2 in terms of the atom. That was more of a presentation with the PowerPoint. I want you to look back on page 33 in your textbook, if you will. I think I covered this, but I want to make sure because it'll come up a little bit later. As you look on page 33 at figure 2.2, you see the periodic table. I believe I said this, but I'm going to make sure that you heard it this time. You look at the periodic table, you know it's full of elements, and you know about the atomic number and so forth. See the red staircase over on the right-hand side? And you see right above that, it says non-metals. You look to the left and you see metals. So everything from the left of that red staircase are metals. So sodium is a metal, and it combines with a non-metal to produce sodium chloride. And you know from what we looked at last week when I put it on Zoom, that sodium donates an electron to the chlorine atom. And so you have a cation and an anion. Cation is a positive charged molecule. Chlorine is an anion, and it is a negatively charged particle. So the two draw each other together. So that's an ionic bond. I hope that's clear for you now. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to page 41, and we're going to look at module 2.3. I'm going to try to keep this to about 25 or 30 minutes. It's 3:52 at this point. So we're looking on page 41, module 2.3. We've already covered what I wanted you to know in the previous pages. Again, look at the learning outcomes. You can look at those. They give you something to focus on. So make sure that you read those and then start looking for answers that would be a learning outcome. Here we are with chemical reactions. And you come down into that column, second column on page 41. You see the big word chemical reactions. Notice what it says. Anytime chemical bonds are formed, broken, or rearranged, that is a chemical reaction. So a chemical reaction is an event in which bonds are broken, bonds are made, or they're rearranged between several different kinds of molecules. As you come down a couple of sentences there, you see the word quintillion. Most of us wouldn't mind having a quintillion dollars, would we? But what they're saying is that our body has chemical reactions going on all day long, all night long. So we're going to look at some of these reactions. We're going to leave that little paragraph and come down to chemical notations. You already know about the abbreviations for carbon, C, hydrogen, H, and so forth. But as you see chemical notation, you see it's a series of symbols and abbreviations for the elements that are used to demonstrate what occurs in a reaction, to demonstrate what occurs in a reaction. So there'll be symbols, there'll be abbreviations, and there will be numbers also. Let's look over on page 42. And we see the first column. And it says the other basic form of chemical reaction is chemical equation. That's going to be a picture that you can see. It's like an algebra expression. A plus B equals C. So as you look at this, you see carbon dioxide, which we breathe out all the time, water, which we drink all the time, and you see those can be mixed, and it'll produce what's called carbonic acid. That is a weak acid. And notice the little arrows. You got an arrow going to the right, and you got an arrow going to the left. This tells you it's a reversible reaction. We'll get into it a little bit later when we talk about acids, bases, and buffers. But anyway, you see carbon dioxide, CNO, and dioxide, two atoms of oxygen combined with a carbon. We've already seen that, how they fit on either side of the carbon. And then water. Ooh, that's a polar molecule, isn't it? That's right. Polar covalent bond there. Whereas the other one is covalent. So you see they can be mixed together. They can be brought together and produce an acid. They can also go back to carbon dioxide and water. I want you to write above the arrows, anabolic, anabolic, A-N-A-B-O-L-I-C, means to build. Under the arrow where it goes to the left, kata, C-A-T-A, bolic. That means to break down into simpler things. The carbon dioxide and the water are known as reactants when the arrow goes to the right, and the H2CO3, the carbonic acid, is a product. When it goes the other way, the carbonic acid becomes, is breaking down into the reactants. It's a reversible reaction. This occurs in our bloodstream all day long. We'll get into that a little bit later, and you'll get into it more deeply when you get into 211. Now we're going to leave that about reactions. We're going to come down to energy and chemical reactions. And you look in the second line, and you see the bold print term energy, defined as the capacity to do work. The capacity to do work. That's how you define energy. It's an unusual definition, isn't it? Seems to be like clouds floating away. But as you look in the second column, you see forms of energy, and you come down about 5 or 6 lines, you see chemical energy. That's the energy in the chemical bonds. We take food in, and you see carbon and oxygen, you see hydrogen and so forth, and they're arranged in various ways, but they're chemically bonded, and there is energy in the bond. Whenever you break the bond, you release energy, and that's what we need to drive our systems in the body. You come down to the second paragraph, and you see certain cells in the body harness electrical energy. That has to do with ions. We need sodium, we need potassium in order to produce electrical impulses, which would be called nerve impulses. But that's a type of energy. And then mechanical energy, they give you an example of that, best explained as energy that's been directly transferred from one object to another. When you swing a bat and you hit the softball, well, the ball gets the energy and flies over the second baseman's head or whatever. So that's mechanical energy. That is also seen in our muscles. Whenever they contract, that's mechanical energy. It causes action. Action. That's all we want to say about energy right now. It gets into all kinds of depths, but we're just going to cover the surface a little bit. Come over to page 43, and we're looking at, in the middle of the first column, homeostasis and types of chemical reactions. Remember how I said we would see homeostasis over and over again? Here's the situation. We have to have a balance in chemical reactions. If you look at the bottom of the column, first column on page 43, you see catabolic reactions. Catabolic reactions, those are reactions in which we break substances into simpler units, and therefore we can absorb them, and then our cells can get the energy from them. So when you have catabolism taking place, and you see there in the second line, it says it's also decomposition. And there's maybe another word a little bit later we'll get to. But you see the AB goes to A plus B. So you take a substance that's complex and you break it into simpler molecules. As you look at the second column, where you see anabolic reactions, those are the ones where we build things, and there's another word for it, synthesis. If you synthesize something, you compose it. You make something. You take simpler substances and you put them together and you come up with a larger substance. We can also have, as you look in that second column up at the top, you can see the word exchange reaction. Exchange means you swap, right? Look at it. Hydrochloric acid plus sodium hydroxide. That happens to be a base. Sodium hydroxide is a base. Hydrochloric acid obviously is an acid. When you mix them, there is an exchange reaction, and you end up with sodium chloride and water. The hydrogen from the acid combines with the OH of the sodium hydroxide to produce the water. What's left is the ion chloride and the sodium, the cation, chloride being the anion, and they connect to each other. And we have exchanged molecules, exchanged atoms. So that's an exchange reaction. We've already talked about anabolic reactions. That means to build. Come down on page 43 where you see reaction rates and enzymes. As you look on page 44, you see down at the bottom, several factors can increase the rate of a reaction in various ways. We're not going to get into all of that, but I want you to know some factors that can influence the speed of a reaction. So as you look at the bottom, temperature is one of those factors that can increase the speed of a reaction. And you see it says raising the temperature of the reactants increases the kinetic energy. Don't worry about kinetic energy, resulting in more forceful and effective collisions, molecules bouncing off each other. Our chemical reactions increase when the temperature in our body goes up. When does it go up? Well, it could be when you have some exercise, but it can also be when you're infected and you get what's called a fever. And if I remember correctly, for every centigrade degree, your metabolism, my metabolism, goes up somewhere around 10 to 13%. So we're speeding up our system to meet the need to fight this invading organism. It can get out of hand, and the temperature can actually denature the proteins that we need to help the reaction go forward. So we don't want our temperature to get too high. 102, 103 is usually okay. I remember having salmonellosis after eating some undercooked chicken. That was not a fun ride, but I had about 103 and a half, and I started getting goofy up in the head. What happens is you look over in the second column on page 44, and you see the presence or absence of a catalyst. A catalyst is a definition there, a substance that increases a reaction rate. Usually those catalysts, or you see the bold print term, are enzymes. Enzymes are proteins. They have a particular shape to carry out a particular function. If our temperature goes up too high, those proteins begin to come unraveled. Their shape changes. You change their shape. They don't carry out their function. Now, that can vary with people. I told you I started getting goofy with about 103.5. But I've got a friend whom I haven't seen for quite some time, but she had 106-degree fever and was talking just as clearly as I am today. It's all in your genes. We're all humans, but we all have variations in our systems. So you don't want to get your fever high, real high. It's good for a certain point, but you don't want to get too high. Come down to the next second paragraph in that column, and you see it says each cell has roughly 4,000 different kinds of enzymes. That's 4,000 different proteins to carry on all the amazing chemistry that goes on in a cell. We'll eventually get to the cell. It is a marvel of engineering, and it's all controlled. It's just not some wild, bubbling cauldron producing stuff by chance. It's all under the control of the genes. Great engineering stuff. But you can read that little paragraph about lactase. If you see ASE on the end of a word, you know it is an enzyme. Some of us like sugar in our coffee. You like sugar in cakes, ice cream. Sucrose is the grainy stuff that we put on in our tea and our coffee and so forth. Sucrose. Sucrase is the enzyme that breaks it down so that we can absorb it and turn it into energy for our own bodies. On page 45, you look at the second column and you see there is a little section there called A&P in the real world, enzyme deficiencies. Sometimes people their genes do not do what they're supposed to. Maybe they're disarranged in some way. I want you to look at the one in the middle, severe combined immunodeficiency syndrome. You remember the boy in the bubble? That's what he had. He had a gene that was defective. You know, we're all defective, right? Every one of us. That's why this hair is going up here. But anyway, his genes dictated he didn't have that enzyme. So he couldn't fight off infections. Now we're going to go over to, and don't forget about these learning outcomes. Make sure you look at those learning outcomes and then look at the quick checks. Look on page 46. There's a good one. Get that straight up there. What factors can influence the rate of a chemical reaction? Well, we just talked about a couple of them, didn't we? What is an enzyme? It's a protein. And what is its function? To speed up a chemical reaction. We need them. Got a lot of them, 4,000 at least. Now, I want you to look under apply what you have learned. And I want you to look at number 3. Some of the toxins that we can come into can damage our enzymes. That's why you don't want to take toxins. There are all kinds of toxins. The black widow's toxin, a copperhead's venom or whatever. They can influence our metabolism, catabolism, anabolism. Metabolism is the overarching word that means synthesis, decomposition, and so forth. So let's go now to module 2.4. and we're looking at inorganic compounds, water, acids, bases, and salts. Again, you see the learning outcomes. Read those over and have those in your mind as you go over the next few pages. When you come down past the learning outcomes, you see biochemistry. That's an amazing study in there. I had to take a couple of courses in there. It was a lot of fun. I had to work hard, but it was fun. The chemistry of life, bio being biology, life. And you come to this inorganic compound. And notice the definition. If someone says, what's an inorganic compound? You would say it's a substance that doesn't contain normally carbon bonded to hydrogen. And they give you some examples of inorganic compounds. Water doesn't have carbon in it, does it? Acids, one of the acids that we deal with all the time is hydrochloric acid. We're going to talk a little bit about that in just a few minutes. We produce it. And then bases and salts. We've got calcium salts that make our bones strong. But we also have to have the salt we typically think of as sodium chloride. So those are inorganic compounds. They don't have carbon and hydrogen hooked together. But you get to organic compounds, and you see those are carbon atoms bound to hydrogen atoms. Come down to water there. Ooh, we need water, don't we? Look at that flashback. Number 2. Tell me what those are. Tell me what the answer to number 2 is. We covered it last time in that Zoom. Now, look at the top of the second column, and you will see water in bold print, and they'll tell you it's 60 to 80% of our body weight. In other words, I'm 213 pounds. So 80% of that's somewhere around 160, 170 pounds. So if they dehydrated me, I'd only weigh about 30, 40 pounds. Properties of water. You want to know those. Absorbs heat without changing significantly in temperature itself. That's a wonderful, wonderful blessing. Talks about heat capacity. So when we get hot, the water within us doesn't start boiling. It slowly heats, which is good. So water absorbs heat without changing its temperature significantly. Come down to water carries heat with it when it changes from a liquid to a gas. And I think I've already mentioned this, but if you lived in Arizona, New Mexico, where it's very dry, the Four Corners area of our country, when you get hot out there, your sweat becomes a vapor. It leaves, it turns to a gas, and that cools you off. In South Carolina, it is hard to get cool outdoors in the months of July and August and maybe some of September because our water can't evaporate. The humidity is too high. But you want to know water carries heat with it whenever it turns from a liquid to a gas. Another one, water cushions and protects the body's structures. I'm going to let you read through that. Our brain floats in water, and that's a wonderful truth that we know about our brain. It protects it a lot. Water acts as a lubricant. Certainly does. Some of you probably tried to eat crackers too fast, and pretty soon you'd soaked up all the water in your mouth, and it was hard to get those crackers down. But water acts as a lubricant, whether it's in the joints, whether it's in the body cavities where organs slide over each other, helping food slide down our esophagus. Sometimes we have to drink a lot of water with our meal, right? But water has that a wonderful characteristic, and water as a solvent. I want you to read that. Let's see, it's 4:15 now. We're about 25, almost 25 minutes into this now, so we'll go for a little bit longer. But I want you to read that, and it says it's a solvent. It's the universal solvent. Why does it dissolve most anything? As you read through that, you're going to see there are two things. Number one, the shape of a water molecule, and number two, the fact that it has polar covalent bonds. Remember that? I hope you've been reading it over and over again, so I'm not talking Greek to you. So the shape of the molecule and the fact that polar covalent bonds hold it together, which means you have charges on either side of the molecule. And you come down in the second paragraph, and about the third line down, it says water molecules can then surround these solutes, like sugar or salt, and keep them apart. Water is only able to dissolve solutes known as hydrophilic. Philic is a root word that means to like Philadelphia or love. Hydro, of course, is water. Look at the figure 211 to the right, and you see up top where salt has been placed in the beaker. Look at the first little circle. You see where sodium and chloride have separated, and the water molecules surround the sodium. And notice the sodium, remember it's a cation? It's going to draw close to a negative charge, which is the oxygen atom. And you've got a number of water molecules surrounding that sodium. It's in solution, we say. Chlorine has the negative charge. What do you think it's going to draw close to? That's right, the hydrogen atoms, because they're slightly positive. But the point is they still surround the chlorine, and so the chlorine is said to be in solution. Same thing here with the polar compound carbon monoxide, a dioxide, but monoxide. And water tends to surround it. The carbon has a little bit of a positive charge, and that draws the oxygen molecule to it. And the oxygen has a negative charge, so it draws the hydrogen atoms to it. It's in solution. So carbon monoxide would be hydrophilic, and sodium and chloride would be hydrophilic. Come down. We'll get this middle paragraph done. See the word hydrophobic? We think of a phobia as being afraid of, right? They've got hating here. And some people have a phobia about all kinds of things. I've got a friend who can't even look at a snake on a TV. So, but here's an example over to the right. Part C, nonpolar covalent compounds are hydrophobic. They don't want anything to do with water. So here we have methane, which is a covalent substance, but it's a nonpolar covalent substance. Here's water below it, which is a polar covalent substance. They do not mix and dissolve each other. As a matter of fact, you have seen this a number of times in your kitchen. In your kitchen, that's right. How many of you like an oil and vinegar salad dressing? You have to shake it all up, don't you? That's right, you have to shake it all up. And the oil, which is usually an olive oil, is usually on the top, and the vinegar, which is a polar covalent compound, is on the bottom. They don't mix. You can't dissolve them in each other. How many of you have cooked ground beef? And you brown it all real good because you're going to maybe turn it into some kind of a meatloaf or something like that, or chili like we do. And if you what we do after we get through cooking it, we'll put the top on and we'll turn it sideways and we'll drain off the liquid inside. And then we dump that good ground beef into a pot full of tomatoes and bell peppers and jalapeno peppers and so forth. But if you let that fluid you poured off sit in a can, or maybe you do it in a measuring cup or something like that, when it cools, the oil, the fat's going to be on top and the water's going to be on the bottom. A nonpolar substance, a covalent substance, a nonpolar covalent substance is on top, and a polar covalent substance is on the bottom. So let's see what else we can go. Let's see, we've got, we're about 30 minutes. I'll go for another 5. Make sure you do the quick check down there. Now it says what 4 properties of water make it a good solvent for living organisms. Let's just make it two properties. That's what they spoke about in the paragraph up above. And which molecules or compounds are likely to be hydrophilic? Think about that. Give me an answer on it. Acids and bases. We'll get through this and we'll call it quits. Acids and bases. Study of acids and bases is really a study of the hydrogen ion. Hydrogen ions need to be controlled. They can get too concentrated with them or not concentrated enough, and you've got a problem. So it says at the bottom, whenever certain hydrogen containing compounds are placed in water, hydrogen, which is actually a metal, it acts like a metal, but it's considered a non-metal. That's why you have carbon and hydrogen hooking together. But anyway, it donates an electron to produce a hydrogen ion, and that ion is positive. Look below, and you see here's a water molecule. Now, not all the water molecules in a glass of water do this, but some of them do. You see it splits into a hydrogen ion. Notice it's got a positive charge. That means it gave an electron to the hydroxide ion, which is the anion. The hydrogen ion would be the cation. Come over on page 48. And you look down at the bottom, you see an acid is a hydrogen ion donor. Whenever hydrochloric acid dissociates, gives that electron to the hydroxide ion, and you got a hydrogen ion that is positively charged. You see it says it's hydrogen ion donor. And then you come down to the bottom. So it's an acid. You come down the bottom, example of acids found in the human body, hydrochloric acid and carbonic acid in the blood. Hydrochloric acid is in the stomach. Have you ever vomited and had it come through your nose? It burned, didn't it? And sometimes you tend to burp, occasionally, and it gets up there and it burns, doesn't it? Yeah, it burns. That's right. It damages tissue. That's why you don't want to get it on yourself. Of course, we've got mucus in here, which helps to protect us. But we've had it go up into the nose and come out the nose when you vomit real hard. And it burns. So hydrogen ion is a donor. An acid is a hydrogen ion donor. And then you look in the second column up at the top, it says a base is a hydrogen ion acceptor. It would take the hydrogen ion and join up with it. It would accept it. You notice in there, I want you to read that about a base is a hydrogen ion acceptor. How many of you have taken baking soda, mixed it with water, drank it, and it helped to calm down your burning stomach? That's right. It can accept that hydrogen. It's no longer free, and it's not burning up your stomach. The pH scale. Just a couple more minutes, and we're going to knock off here. The pH scale. I want you to read that. I may just pick it up a little bit later during the week, and because we're running around about 35 minutes now. So I want you to read about the pH scale, and over on page 49, buffers, and we'll pick that up maybe say Wednesday afternoon or something like that. We'll move into some organic compounds or some more about inorganic compounds. Over on page 50, salts and electrolytes. Okay? Start reading. I hope you've been reading your information because, another couple of weeks we'll have a test. All right? See you.